They called it the graveyard of empires. Alexander the Great bled here. The British marched in and marched out broken. The Soviets fought for a decade and collapsed soon after. Even the most powerful military on Earth spent 20 years in these mountains and left with nothing to claim. Every empire that tried to conquer Afghanistan met the same ending defeat. But that is only half the story. Beyond the war footage and ruined roads lies something ancient and unbreakable, a land of fierce hospitality, living poetry, and mountains that have guarded lapis lazuli for 5,000 years. A place where culture endures, identity survives, and resistance is woven into the soil itself. This is Afghanistan, and once you understand its history and its soul, you will never see it the same way again. Afghanistan, the geography of survival. To understand Afghanistan, you must first understand where it sits on the map of the world, right in the heart of Asia. That merciless crossroads where civilizations have clashed for millennia, where armies have passed and perished, where time itself seems to move differently than anywhere else on Earth. This is not a country that was designed for peace. Its very geography is a fortress. To the north, the Hindu Kush Mountains pierce the sky with peaks that scrape above 20,000 feet. Their slopes covered in eternal snow, their passes choked with ice for half the year. To the south, the land flattens into sun-scorched deserts where temperatures can reach 130 degrees and water is more precious than gold. Between these extremes lie valleys squeezed between cliffs, plateaus swept by winds that carry dust from 100 ancient battlefields, and rivers that sometimes flood and sometimes vanish entirely into the earth. This is a land of contrasts so extreme they seem impossible. In the same country, you can freeze to death in a mountain blizzard and die of heat stroke in a desert within a single week of travel. The snowy and unforgiving peaks of the Hindu Kush cast shadows over barren valleys, where nothing grows except the toughest shrubs. Fertile oases burst with citrus orchards and pomegranate trees, just miles from wastelands where even the hardiest nomads struggle to survive. And everywhere, the footprints of history are pressed into the soil. The armies of Alexander the Great marched through these passes. The horsemen of Genghis Khan swept through these valleys like a storm of death. The caravans of the Silk Road rested in these cities, trading silk and spices and ideas that would reshape civilizations. The colossal Buddha statues of Bamiyan watched over travelers for 1,500 years before being reduced to rubble in an act of destruction that shocked the world. And the fresh craters of modern wars still scar the landscape, reminders that this geography has not finished writing its story of blood and survival. Afghanistan's beauty is wild and unforgiving. Its history is deeper than most nations can comprehend. Its fate is complex beyond any simple explanation. This is a country where the law of hospitality is more sacred than any written constitution. A stranger who arrives at your door must be fed, sheltered, and protected. Even if that stranger is your enemy, even if protecting them costs you your life. But survival here is also a daily struggle that most of the world cannot imagine, where the next meal is never guaranteed, where the next bomb might fall without warning, where the next winter might be the one that finally breaks you. This is Afghanistan, a tired but unshakable geography that the world often forgets, but history never abandons. And to truly understand it, you must walk through its cities, breathe its air, and feel the weight of its 1,000-year-old stones beneath your feet. Kabul, the fortress heart. Imagine a valley squeezed 1,800 meters above sea level, surrounded on all sides by mountains that have witnessed more bloodshed than any landscape on earth. This is Kabul, the capital city, but a fortress built by geography itself. For thousands of years, this valley has served as a strategic prize that every invading army has sought to control. The Mughal emperors made it their summer retreat, escaping the brutal heat of the Indian plains to enjoy the cool mountain air. The Silk Road caravans stopped here to rest, trade, and prepare for the treacherous mountain passes that lay ahead. And every empire that ever tried to hold Afghanistan began by trying to hold Kabul. The air here is thin, but the streets are dense with life. When you breathe, you inhale everything at once. The dust carried by sharp winds descending from the peaks. The smoke of grilled kebab rising from street vendors. The pungent smell of spices piled high in market stalls. The diesel fumes of trucks and motorcycles fighting through traffic that follows no rules anyone can explain. Kabul is chaos and order existing in the same breath. It is ancient and modern colliding on every corner. It is beautiful and devastating in equal measure. Above the city, the worn walls of the ancient Bala Hisar fortress stand guard on the hills like a silent sentinel. These walls have seen everything. The armies of Alexander the Great passed beneath them. The horsemen of Genghis Khan rode past on their way to slaughter. The British Empire suffered one of its most humiliating defeats within sight of them. Soviet tanks rolled through the streets below, while these walls watched in silence. If these walls could speak, they would tell stories that would take 1,000 years to finish. The Kabul River flows through the city like a metaphor for Afghanistan itself. Sometimes it runs full and powerful. Sometimes it dries to a trickle, barely surviving, waiting for rains that may never come. Bullet holes pockmark walls that were once beautiful. The deep wounds left by modern wars are readable in every neighborhood, in the eyes of people who have seen too much to ever forget. But beneath all this chaos and the heavy burden of history, life continues with an unshakable stubbornness that defines the Afghan spirit. In the narrow streets of the old city, merchants sell carpets woven with patterns that have not changed in centuries. Children chase each other through alleyways that have existed since before Europe had cities. Old men sit in tea houses discussing politics and poetry, the same conversations their grandfathers had in the same chairs. Kabul is Afghanistan's tired, wounded, but unshakably continuing to beat heart. Every corner of it witnesses a tragedy. Every street tells a 1,000-year-old story of resistance and survival. Herat, the Florence of the East. If Kabul is a fortress hardened by war, then Herat is a rose blooming in a fertile oasis. Stretched toward the Iranian plateau in the country's far west, this city represents something most outsiders never associate with Afghanistan. Elegance, refinement, artistic genius that once rivaled anything Europe could produce. The air here is different from Kabul's sharp mountain winds. It is softer, more gentle, full of whispers of poetry and history carried by breezes blowing from Persia. This is Afghanistan's gateway to the Persian world. The place where the country's cultural soul has beaten for centuries, and the place that proves Afghanistan is not only a battlefield, but also the cradle of one of the world's greatest civilizations. In the 15th century, during the peak of the Timurid Renaissance, Herat was enviously called the Florence of the East throughout the entire Islamic world. Under the patronage of Queen Gohar Shad, one of the most powerful women in medieval history, this city hosted the greatest artists, poets, calligraphers, and architects of the age. The heart of this golden age still stands in the city's center. The Masjid-e-Jami, the Friday Mosque, rises toward the sky as an artistic miracle that takes your breath away. This is not just a place of worship, it is a testament to what Afghanistan was capable of producing when peace allowed genius to flourish. Every surface of the mosque is covered with intricate tile work in shades of blue, turquoise, and gold that seem to glow with their own inner light. The geometric patterns are so complex that mathematicians have studied them for centuries. The calligraphy contains verses from the Quran, rendered so beautifully that even those who cannot read Arabic find themselves moved to tears. This is the Afghanistan that the world forgets exists. The Afghanistan of beauty, culture, and artistic achievement that rivals anything the Italian Renaissance produced. In contrast to the mosque's delicate elegance, the citadel of Herat rises above the city like a massive sentinel of stone and mud brick. This is one of the oldest fortresses on Earth, its foundations laid more than 2,000 years ago, perhaps during the time when Alexander the Great's armies first set foot on these lands. The massive sloped walls have been destroyed and rebuilt countless times, each generation adding their own layer to a structure that refuses to fall permanently. This fortress is a silent witness to the truth that Herat was shaped not only by art, but also by war. Countless sieges, the rise and fall of empires. Destruction followed by rebuilding, followed by destruction once again. When you stand atop the citadel and look down at the bazaars of the old city spread below, you feel the resilience of time itself. Merchants sell goods in the same covered markets that have operated for 1,000 years. Craftsmen work copper and silver, using techniques passed down through generations. The smell of spices and fresh bread mixes with the sounds of bargaining that have echoed through these streets since before America existed. This is a living museum, a reminder that Afghanistan's identity cannot be reduced to war and suffering. Beneath the rubble and the headlines lies a civilization that once led the world in art, architecture, and intellectual achievement. Bamiyan, the wound that will not heal. When you advance toward the highest and most unforgiving peaks of the Hindu Kush Mountains, the geography transforms into something that takes your breath away. Stretched at 2,500 meters altitude, surrounded by cliffs of soft sandstone that glow orange and gold in the setting sun, lies a valley that was once one of the most important crossroads on Earth. This is Bamiyan, the point where ideas, religions, and art flowing from China, India, and the Persian world met, mingled, and created something entirely new. For centuries, this remote valley became a refuge for Buddhist faith, a sanctuary where pilgrims traveled thousands of miles to pray, and where monks carved entire monasteries into the living rock. And here, in this valley where civilizations merged, the most magnificent monuments of human ambition and faith were carved into the soft sandstone cliffs. The colossal Buddha statues silently ruled over Bamiyan for 1,500 years. The larger statue stood 175 feet tall. The smaller one stood 115 feet. They were the largest standing depictions of Buddha anywhere in the world. They were not just stone. They were symbols of a tranquility beyond time, guiding lights for the millions of pilgrims, merchants, soldiers, and travelers who passed through this mountain gateway over the centuries. Their serene faces gazed out across the valley, offering peace to all who looked upon them, regardless of faith or origin. Today, those massive niches stand with a painful emptiness that strikes you like a physical blow. In March 2001, the Taliban destroyed both statues using explosives, artillery, and anti-aircraft guns. The destruction took weeks. The larger Buddha resisted so stubbornly that they had to lower men on ropes to plant dynamite directly into its chest. The world watched in horror as 15 centuries of human heritage were reduced to rubble in an act of cultural barbarism that still defies comprehension. Now, Bamiyan is defined not only by what was there, but by what was ruthlessly torn away. The empty niches are wounds carved into the cliff face, scars that will never fully heal, reminders that some losses cannot be undone no matter how much time passes. But even in this wounded valley, life persists. The local Hazara people, who have faced persecution for centuries because of their ethnicity and their Shia faith, continue to farm the valley floor. Children play in the shadow of the empty niches, too young to remember what once stood there, but old enough to hear the stories from their parents. Archaeologists have discovered that the cliff walls are honeycombed with caves containing ancient paintings and artifacts that the Taliban could not destroy because they did not know they existed. Bamiyan is a place where tragedy and hope exist side by side, where the worst of human nature and the best of human resilience are both on display, and where the ghost of what was lost continues to haunt everyone who visits. Jalalabad, the subtropical gateway. When you make a sharp descent from the high-altitude prison of the mountains eastward toward the Pakistani border, Afghanistan's face changes completely. The temperature rises, the air grows thick and humid, and suddenly you find yourself in a landscape that seems to belong to a different country entirely. This is Jalalabad, Afghanistan's winter capital, an almost subtropical oasis that has served as a refuge from the brutal mountain cold for centuries. Unlike the harsh continental interior, Jalalabad is mild, green, and full of life. The air carries the sharp, sweet scents of citrus blossoms, spreading from orange, lemon, and grapefruit orchards that stretch for miles. The Mughal emperors loved this place. They would flee Kabul's merciless winter cold to spend months in the gardens they established here, enjoying the mild weather and the abundant fruits that grew nowhere else in their empire. Even today, Jalalabad's markets overflow with produce that cannot survive anywhere else in Afghanistan. Pomegranates the size of softballs, oranges so sweet they taste like candy, sugarcane that workers press into fresh juice on street corners. But Jalalabad is also the guardian on the Afghan side of the most notorious mountain pass in human history, the Khyber Pass. For thousands of years, this narrow corridor through the mountains has served as the only viable route connecting the Indian subcontinent to the rest of Asia. Every army that ever tried to invade India came through here. Every merchant carrying silk and spices from China to Rome passed through here. Every refugee fleeing war in one direction or another has crowded through this same narrow gap in the mountains. The Khyber Pass has witnessed more history than almost any other geographic feature on Earth, and Jalalabad sits at its entrance like a gatekeeper who has seen everything and forgotten nothing. This is one of Afghanistan's most dynamic and most unstable crossroads. The vibrant chaos of South Asia meets the harshness of the Afghan mountains here. Pakistani influence bleeds across the border. Trade flows in both directions, legal and illegal. The energy of the place is electric, dangerous, unpredictable. Greenery and danger are intertwined so completely that you cannot separate one from the other. Jalalabad is beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. A reminder that Afghanistan's geography creates places where life flourishes precisely because they sit at the intersection of competing powers. Kandahar, the cradle of nations. When you descend to Afghanistan's south, toward the country's most arid and most unforgiving lands, you feel the change in your bones. The sharp cold of the mountains gives way to scorching heat that can crack the earth. The air fills with the dense smell of dust that seems to coat everything and everyone. This is Kandahar, not just a city, the unshakable fortress of the Pashtun world, the cradle where modern Afghanistan was born, and the place where the country's deepest, most conservative traditions are preserved with an intensity that outsiders struggle to comprehend. For centuries, Kandahar served as a vital center for caravans, moving between the Indian subcontinent and the Iranian plateau. Its location made it essential. Whoever controlled Kandahar controlled the trade routes, whoever controlled the trade routes controlled the wealth, and whoever controlled the wealth controlled power. But Kandahar's true legacy was written in the 18th century, when Ahmad Shah Durrani, a young cavalry commander, united the Pashtun tribes and laid the foundations of the modern Afghan nation. He chose Kandahar as his capital, the first capital of an empire that would eventually become Afghanistan. His mausoleum still stands in the city, a place of pilgrimage for Afghans who remember him as the father of their nation. Kandahar is also known as the birthplace of the Taliban. In the chaos following the Soviet withdrawal and the civil war that tore the country apart, A group of religious students emerged from the madrasas surrounding this city with a vision of Islamic law that would reshape Afghanistan and eventually draw the attention of the entire world. The movement that began in these dusty streets would shelter Osama bin Laden, provoke the American invasion, and ultimately return to power after 2 decades of war. The story of modern Afghanistan cannot be told without understanding Kandahar's central role in shaping it. Here, the unshakable code of honor known as Pashtunwali governs every aspect of life. This is not just tradition. It is law more binding than anything written in any constitution. Hospitality is sacred. Revenge is mandatory. A man's word is his bond, and breaking it means death or exile. Women are protected and restricted in equal measure. Family loyalty supersedes all other considerations. This code has governed Pashtun society for thousands of years, and no outside force has ever succeeded in changing it. Not the British, not the Soviets, not the Americans. Kandahar is Afghanistan's raw, unfiltered, and fiery spirit. The place where the country's identity is preserved in its purest and most unyielding form. A history written in blood. History does not merely flow through Afghan lands. It crashes into these mountains, breaks in these valleys, and rewrites fate with each passing century. This is the chessboard of global powers. The place where the world's greatest ambitions are tested and mostly fail. Every turning point has been engraved into the soil's memory, leaving traces deeper than the one before, and the pattern repeats with a consistency that seems almost supernatural. The story begins with Alexander the Great driving his armies into these rugged cliffs in the 4th century BC. He was 26 years old, convinced he was destined to rule the world. He was the first great conqueror to pass through here, but he would not be the last. His armies fought for 3 years trying to subdue the Afghan tribes. He married a local princess named Roxana to cement alliances. And when he finally left, the region remained unconquered in any meaningful sense. The tribes simply waited for his armies to pass, then resumed their lives as if nothing had happened. Centuries later, the horsemen of Genghis Khan swept through these valleys like a storm of annihilation. They massacred entire cities. They destroyed irrigation systems that had sustained civilization for centuries. But even the Mongols could not hold Afghanistan. Their empire fragmented, and the land returned to its eternal pattern of tribal independence and resistance to outside control. Then came the Golden Age. The Silk Road transformed Afghanistan from a battleground into a center of civilization. Buddhist art reached its peak in Bamiyan. The Timurid Renaissance in Herat produced masterpieces of Islamic art. For a brief, shining moment, these lands were known not for war, but for culture. But golden ages do not last. In the 19th century, the British and Russian empires entered a deadly struggle for influence over these lands called the Great Game. Afghanistan became the buffer zone between British India and the expanding Russian Empire. Britain invaded 3 times. The first invasion in 1839 ended in catastrophe. Of the 16,500 soldiers and camp followers who retreated from Kabul in January 1842, exactly 1 European survived to reach safety. The legend of the graveyard of empires was born, and history repeated itself. When Soviet tanks rolled into Kabul in December 1979, they became stuck in a bloody quagmire lasting 10 years. The Soviets lost 15,000 dead. They killed over 1 million Afghans. They created millions of refugees. And when they withdrew in 1989, they left behind a shattered country that would descend into civil war, give rise to the Taliban, shelter the planners of September 11th, and draw yet another superpower into the graveyard. Afghanistan's history is not a series of events. It is an uninterrupted cycle of pain, resistance, and survival. The women who refuse to disappear, perhaps the toughest battle in modern Afghanistan, is being fought not in mountain passes or dusty valleys, but behind closed doors in the lives of women who constitute half of a nation's soul. Just 1 generation ago, The streets of Afghan cities echoed with the footsteps of women going to universities, serving as judges, writing in newspapers, speaking in parliament. They were architects trying to build a new future for a weary land. Today, that future seems stolen. School doors have been shut in the faces of girls above the 6th grade. University lecture halls sit empty. The public sphere has been almost completely purged of women's voices. The progress of a generation has been erased in months. But resistance is not always fought with weapons. It exists in the pages of textbooks, shared in whispers, in secret homeschools operating behind tightly drawn curtains, in teachers who risk imprisonment to educate girls who hunger for knowledge. This is an invisible front, where ideas, not bullets, are the weapons. And on this front, the Afghan woman continues to be not only her country's lost conscience, but also its most unshakable hope. The soul beneath the rubble. Beneath the dust and rubble that the world sees lies a thousands of years old elegance and an unshakable code of honor that defines what it means to be Afghan. The most sacred element of this code is the law of hospitality, known as Pashtunwali. Here, a cup of tea offered to a stranger is not just a beverage. It is a promise of refuge. Your home becomes a sacred sanctuary even for a person with whom you have a blood feud. The hand raised against a guest brings the greatest shame upon an entire family. This code has governed Afghan society since before Islam arrived, before Buddhism flourished, before Alexander marched through the passes. It is older than any religion. And it endures because it speaks to something fundamental about human dignity and the obligations we owe to one another. This is also the land where Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi was born, the 13th century poet, whose words have been translated into every major language and whose verses about love and divine connection still resonate across cultures and centuries. Poetry here is as natural as breathing. Even illiterate farmers can recite verses by heart. Even warriors pause to listen when someone speaks beautiful words. The power of poetry in Afghan culture challenges the power of weapons. It provides solace in times of war. It preserves history when libraries burn. It connects generations across centuries of upheaval. The world's purest and deepest lapis lazuli blue has been extracted from the mountains of Badakhshan for more than 5,000 years. That celestial blue adorning the funeral mask of Tutankhamun, the ultramarine pigments in Renaissance paintings, the brilliant blues of Persian miniatures, all of it came from this soil. Afghan lapis lazuli has traveled the Silk Road, crossed oceans, decorated palaces, and temples on every continent. It is a gift from this geography to the entire world, a reminder that Afghanistan has given humanity treasures beyond measure. And then, there are the carpets. Every Afghan carpet tells a story. The patterns encode family histories, tribal identities, and regional traditions that stretch back centuries. The colors come from natural dyes extracted from plants that grow in these valleys. The wool comes from sheep that graze these mountains. Every knot is tied by hand, thousands upon thousands of knots forming images and patterns that carry meaning only the weaver fully understands. These carpets are not just objects. They are genealogies woven into wool. They are portable histories that families carry with them through exile and displacement. They are art that serves as identity, as wealth, as connection to a homeland, even when that homeland is lost. When you step back from Afghanistan and try to see it whole, you realize something the headlines never capture. This is not just a graveyard of empires, it is a cradle of civilizations. It is not just a land of war, it is a land of poetry and hospitality and artistic genius. The Afghan people have survived everything history could throw at them. Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, the British Empire, the Soviet Union, the Americans, the Taliban, and still they persist. Still they welcome strangers into their homes. Still they recite poetry by firelight. Still they weave carpets that will outlast any empire. Still, they educate their daughters in secret when schools are closed. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Those are the words of Rumi, born in these very lands 800 years ago. Perhaps Afghanistan's story, despite all its wounds, is the story of a light that refuses to be extinguished. Perhaps the world needs to stop seeing Afghanistan as a problem to be solved and start seeing it as a civilization to be understood. The mountains will remain. The valleys will endure. The code of honor will persist, and the Afghan people will continue to survive, as they have for thousands of years, because survival is what this geography teaches and what these people have mastered like no others on Earth. The next time you see Afghanistan in the headlines, remember what lies beneath the rubble. Remember the blue tiles of Herat. Remember the empty niches of Bamiyan, where Buddhas once stood. Remember the citrus orchards of Jalalabad. Remember the unshakable code of Pashtunwali. Remember the women studying in secret. Remember the carpets and the poetry and the lapis lazuli. Remember that this graveyard of empires is also a birthplace of civilizations. And remember what Rumi understood 8 centuries ago. The wound is the place where the light enters you. If this journey moved you, subscribe for more explorations of the world's most extraordinary places. Share this with someone who only knows Afghanistan from war footage. And remember that behind every headline, there is a land with a soul worth understanding.